Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon all of you. Welcome to Islam and Life, and thank you for welcoming us into your home this evening to share in these conversations. My name is Maimouna Hussein, and my co-host is Brother Khalid Al-Qazzaz. We're in a beautiful studio this evening, coming to you live as we return to Islam and Life. And as we begin, we say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We begin in the remembrance and praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we begin anything that we hope will be of goodness, inshallah. So let's begin with some recitation of the Holy Quran.
الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم.
Jazakallah khair. As we start, I also want to share some important links with you for Islam and Life. The first is that we are broadcasting as a live podcast, and you should see the link come up at the bottom of the screen shortly if you want to join or tune in after as well. It will be available. The second thing I want to share with you also is this is a live interactive program. So please, if you have any questions throughout the show, you're welcome to send those in, and you can send those in through the YouTube channel, or you can email us at productions@macnet.ca when we ask some questions and if you have some feedback for us. As well, we want to know where you're all coming from tonight. So whoever is tuning in, please let us know. The last thing is you also have an option to join us and ask us questions through Zoom Live. So you go on to Zoom, and the meeting ID is 905-822-2626. You'll find us there towards the end of the show. We will open it up. We'll open up the platform for you to ask questions live. As tonight is our first show, I do want to begin with a land acknowledgement. We want to start by recognizing that where the studio is tonight on Turtle Island is part of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In particular, we recognize this as the territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe-Wendat, the land that is home to the Métis, Inuit, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. Through the show, I will ask our brother Khalid Al-Qazzaz to talk to you a little bit about what our hope is and goals are in terms of Islam and life.
Jazakumullah khairan, Sister Maimouna. We're excited to be back here today and be part of this show and this production. We were able, alhamdulillah, to run this show at the beginning of last year as a pilot, and had a few interesting conversations, and we meant to bring this back full force starting from today. The idea here is to really do or create a platform where Muslims are able to have real contemporary conversations around what matters to them now and what is relevant to everything that they do. We've heard for a long time conversations around and discussions around fiqhi aspect of our religion, the halal and the haram, some history aspects, but very few conversations we have together that relates to our day-to-day lives. Actually, between the halal and the halal, what is the Islamic choice? What is the Islamic preference? And we also wanted to create a conversation or start a conversation where we are in control of the agenda and we're not a guest to somebody else's agenda. So we own our own agenda, we own our own narrative, we have our own Muslim conversations and Muslim discussions. And then we also would like to basically create a production that reflects our ideas, our creativity, that shares our Islamic perspective into life, and how we contribute to society. We hope to do all this today and every week, similar to this evening, and engage with our guests in an interesting, challenging, and critical way as well. So we hope to do this together, myself and Sister Maimouna.
Jazakallah khair. And our hope is really to bring guests that are contributing to the Canadian Islamic narrative and engage in those meaningful conversations that Brother Khalid is speaking about. And as you know, this show is a production of the Muslim Association of Canada, and MAC really strives to be a positive force for change in society by promoting and engaging Muslims within the wider society, looking at building bridges and working collaboratively with other groups, organizations that share common goals and values. And through our presence, through MAC's presence in Canada, we've been involved in this work over 25 years now, and we've had 4 really big areas of impact that we focus on. The first is developing a Muslim Canadian identity. The second is upholding a balanced and mainstream message of Islam. The next is delivering programs and services to thousands of Canadians across the country. And finally, looking at creating spaces for Muslims in Canada to really find a sense of belonging and then thriving and contributing. So through these areas of impact, we've really worked over the past several years to build and enable multiple generations of Canadians to serve their community through acts of service. So that's where the show is at, and that's where we kind of come in. And because tonight is one of our, we're starting back up again, we want to invite all of you to really engage with us in these critical conversations. And so our critical question of the week is, Brother Khalid?
We have many critical questions that we are that we would like to discuss and engage in. And actually, this is an activity where we are going to not give you answers and not attempt to point the direction, but actually ask those difficult questions. So we're going to prepare this segment every week. And if you have actually some questions that you would like to share and engage with us that we take on with our guests, please feel free to email us or post a comment on YouTube. So we will keep this as an open segment, open for communication and discussion.
And so tonight, again, looking at your feedback and looking at what kinds of conversations you want to engage in and what kinds of topics you feel will contribute to this show, we invite you to tell us and provide your suggestions or questions on what kinds of topics you think are important to this conversation around the narrative of Muslims and Islam in Canada. You can email us, and you're just going to see that email pop up below. It's productions@macnet.ca, and we'll be looking over that, and you can send that us over the course of the week. Now let's talk about tonight's episode. Brother Khalid.
Yeah, so we wanted to start basically this series and this season, if we use the language of the shows today, by actually highlighting the importance of such productions and what is the significance of having Muslim productions and creative Muslim productions. And the best to do this is to do it with experts who've had their own share of this. We have a Canadian experience, we have an American experience, and we have an academic who specializes on this. We'll talk about Muslim representation in the media. We'll talk about these creative productions, and we'll talk about owning our narrative as Muslims in nowadays time. So that's the conversation that we have for today. We have a segment that we had to shoot separately because of the time differences of one of our guests, and then we'll continue the live conversation here at the studio.
Thank you. So, as Brother Khalid is saying, we do have 3 guests that we'll be conversing with, but first, let's take a look at what our research team has put together on this topic.
Islam is a communication-based religion. The message of Islam was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ through the Quran, and then spread across tribes and nations through various means of communication. During the formation of the earliest Muslim community in the state of Medina, oral communication was the basic mode of social interaction and the only way to spread information. Both leaders and followers in Medina were closely linked, creating a tightly knit social network. Often members of the community witnessed the moments during which the revelation was descended upon the Prophet Muhammad, which was then communicated orally by him to the companions. The companions would then immediately learn the text by heart and spread it further into their network. The Quran, however, emphasizes the importance of written communication as a way to preserve information due to the nature and forgetfulness of people. As translated in verse 282 of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "O believers, when you contract a loan for a fixed period of time, commit it to writing." Although the Quranic revelations were primarily preserved in the people's memories, out of fear that the knowledge might disappear with time, they were also recorded in writing and on materials such as palm branches and stones. The verses were then compiled and copied onto sheets of parchment shortly after the death of the Prophet by a companion named Zayd ibn Thabit. The communication of the message of Islam through both oral and written form allowed the Muslim community to grow from just a cluster to a thriving state extending across Africa and Asia. Communication, to this day, is central to the practice, the preservation, and the spread of the Islamic faith. Contemporary mass media is currently an important means of da'wah, which means that to introduce the divine message of Islam to people. Technology and communication systems are currently being used as tools for educating and influencing public opinion. Any da'wah efforts requires individuals who can communicate effectively and to various segments of society in unique and creative ways. It is important to note, however, that Islam imposes a moral and ethical framework for every individual hoping to spread information to the masses. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in verse 6 of Surah Al-Hujurat, "O believers, if an evildoer brings you any news, verify it, so that you do not harm people unknowingly, becoming regretful for what you have done." Islam forbids any possible harm inflicted unjustly on people through communication. Therefore, journalists and mass media content designers must assert a sense of responsibility that is rooted in religious norms when spreading the noble message of Islam through any form of communication or modern media. This moral responsibility extends to each and every one of us, being consumers of media through numerous platforms. We will speak today to Muslims in the community who have used media and communication to promote Islam. Firstly, we will be speaking to Brother Raif Haggag, a singer and songwriter at Awakening Record. Secondly, we will be speaking to Dr. Muhammad Hamas al-Masri, an associate professor at Doha Institute of Graduate Studies. And thirdly, we will be speaking to Brother Taha Ghayour, Vice President of Sound Vision, a Muslim media institution.
All right, so we're back. So we have our three guests that we want to have the conversation with. As Brother Khalid had mentioned, a part of this is pre-recorded because we had two guests that were in other parts of the world and one from a different time zone. So the first two that you'll be listening to tonight, Brother Raif Haggag, he's a Muslim American singer-songwriter who uses his critically acclaimed song and singing expertise as a tool to promote the beauty of Islam. He's a world-renowned artist who is signed with Awakening Music, and he's the executive director at Mini Muslims, which is an animation studio that produces songs and stories for Muslim children. In addition to his music, Raif has been the star of an Indonesian TV series called Journey of a Backpacker, in which he visits notable Indonesian towns and cities exploring the history of Islam in Nusantara, which is a city in Indonesia. And the second guest that you will be seeing is Dr. al-Masri. Dr. Muhammad Hamas al-Masri is an associate professor in the Media and Cultural Studies program at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. And his research focuses on Arab press, and he has been featured in numerous reputable publications. He's also appeared on international news networks such as CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC World, as well as a media and political analyst specializing in Egypt as well. And he also creates music, which he'll be speaking about under the media house called Bullet Point Music. And we will introduce Brother Taha Ghayour after this as well.
Thank you so much, Sister Maimuna, for this introduction. I'm happy to be with two people I really enjoy listening to in different ways and learning from actually as well. I want to start right away with Dr. Masri, and and asking him basically about Muslim representation in media in general. And I think this is a subject of your studies. And if we start this conversation around how Muslims are viewed in Western media in general, particularly in North America, and is there any development, is there any improvement, and is there any focus or areas where Muslims can contribute more to improving that image and that representation?
Okay, so that's a lot to unpack. So I have 3 hours to respond, right?
We can start.
First of all, just a quick clarification. I no longer work at the University of North Alabama. I resigned a few years ago, so I'm full-time and permanent, inshallah, at the Doha Institute in the Media Studies program. We changed our name from Media and Cultural Studies to Media Studies. So your question is important, and I was joking about the 3 hours, but also I probably sadly could talk for 3 hours on that. The long and the short of it is that there's been a ton of research on representations of Islam and Muslims in Western news media, and the overwhelming majority of that research suggests that Muslims are portrayed negatively and that Islam is portrayed stereotypically. So, and interestingly, there have been studies done, you know, in the context of the United States, Canada, various European countries, Australia, New Zealand, and the results are pretty consistent. So, you know, we could get into possible explanations of, you know, why the portrayals and representations are negative and stereotypical, but that's kind of what the research shows. Some of the research that I've done with my research partner, Dr. Mohammed Al-Nawawi, shows that Muslims are less likely to be portrayed as victims, and they're more likely to be portrayed as aggressors. So I'll just really quickly, you said I have 2 to 3 minutes to kind of give a response. So I think I still have a little bit of time. A couple of the studies that we've done focused on 5 separate terrorist attacks that occurred. Everybody remembers them. They occurred in 2015 and 2016. There was an attack in Paris. There was another attack in Brussels. So those 2 attacks occurred in Western societies, and the victims were primarily non-Muslims. And then we looked at attacks in Ankara, Turkey, and also Maiduguri, Nigeria. And in those places, the victims were primarily Muslims, almost exclusively Muslims, in fact. And so we did a qualitative study and a quantitative study. I don't have time to unpack all the results, but basically, Western news media, American news media in this case, effectively ignored the attacks that occurred against Muslims and really played up the attacks that were that victimized non-Muslims. And to kind of control for potential confounding variables, we selected those 5 attacks strategically, because in all 5 cases the attackers were Muslims. The terrorist attack was committed. Those terrorist attacks were committed by Muslims. So we're kind of effectively controlling for the identity of the attacker. Also, one last thing on that: the attacks on Paris and Brussels were framed as acts of terrorism, whereas the attacks in Ankara and Maiduguri, Nigeria, were framed as internal conflicts, despite the fact that the attacks clearly met the textbook definitions of terrorism.
So you're talking about negative portrayal of Muslims and neglecting Muslims in news media particularly. I wanted to focus a bit on change. We understand that there is a peak and a different focus when it came to September 11 moving forward. But do you track any change in that representation of Muslims in news media or other forms of media? And is the change towards the positive side or more negative?
You know, we hear a lot of talk about change. Certainly, anecdotally, there's evidence that, you know, certain news outlets have really, I think, recognized some of the shortcomings and failings of Western news reporting, and they've tried to introduce more positive representations of Muslims. So one prominent example that comes to mind was the three Muslim college kids that were murdered in a hate crime in North Carolina in 2015. Right, Our Three Winners. There was a kind of a campaign launched in the aftermath of that, and a lot of news media in the United States did provide very sympathetic coverage, and they highlighted their Muslim identities, right? But the empirical research, which is really going to focus on large samples and general patterns, doesn't suggest that there's been any kind of a major shift. In fact, like if you look at the more recent studies on big news outlets like the New York Times, the results are pretty consistent, that Islam tends to be ignored except when there's something negative, something bad happening, and Muslims are much more likely to be represented negatively. Some of the more interesting research in that line has been done by Travis Dixon, who's a really well-known scholar who does what he calls inter-reality comparison research. So he compares effectively real-world statistics and numbers with news media portrayal numbers. And what he finds is that Muslims are overrepresented as criminals and terrorists in the news media. So I think sometimes when we talk about the positive change, we may be overstating it. However, the last thing, I don't want to hog all the time, but we also have to keep in mind that news outlets are diverse and Western society itself is diverse. So it's very difficult for me to sit up here and talk about Western news media when you literally have thousands and thousands of news outlets and you have many dozens of Western countries.
Thank you so much, Dr. Masri. As I invite Brother Raif for some of his thoughts as well, I want to kind of do a bit of a shift because I think you've helped us kind of look at some of the research part of this. And I know, Brother Raif, you're in that production space. And, you know, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that narrative. So in fact, if the research is showing that this is what's happening, at least from the news perspective, where does Muslim media production play a role in this, and how do we create, develop, and kind of have that the narrative that we want? And you know, how have you done this?
I believe, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I think we should have more of these conversations. I'm gonna speak more about the creative production because although news media is very powerful, and even like an interview style production, my work is primarily focused on creative production. And what's really powerful about the creative arts, whether it be music or film or the performing arts, is it brings beauty into the discussion. So no offense to all the academics out there, but the quickest way to someone's heart, I believe, is through the arts and through creative productions. In particular, music. Music is such a beautiful art form, and you can make people feel a certain way just with a few notes. And similarly, when you present a film and tell a story, and so when we're speaking about media productions, it really is a form of storytelling. And the best people to tell stories about a particular group are the people themselves. And we have no shortage of rich history in Muslim communities across the world in creating this kind of art, this kind of production. Now we call it production, but back then it was just music and stories that people told for hundreds of years. And we're very proud, and we should be very proud of this heritage and this history.
Thank you, Brother Raif, for this important angle, completing the analysis of how Muslims are portrayed in news media particularly. But I think it's safe to say that it also extends to non-news media. And you mentioned the power of storytelling, and I think going back to the question on changing that stereotype or changing that representation, having more original, authentic Muslim voices in creating content and writing these stories, I think is a key aspect. I want to ask you two parts of this question, and maybe Dr. Masri also can weigh in. The first is basically, can you give us some perspective on the history or the development of how Muslims contributed to media in different forms, let's say over the past few decades? And the second part is basically, how effective is this, and how is it open? Is it open to non-Muslim audience, or is it only viewed within our own Muslim communities in North America?
So over the last 2 decades, I think we've seen a lot more Muslim representation in the creative productions and the creative spaces. And I think it's important to point out, and I think we're all realizing this, that the Muslim communities in the West and in the United States and Canada in particular, and UK, were very diverse, ethnically, language-wise, but also religiosity. And I think this is where a lot of us are beginning to realize that when we say Muslim representation, that can mean a lot of things to many different people. For many people, for many Muslims in the West, the label Muslim is simply an identity. For other communities, it's a way of life, and people are more serious about the practice of the faith itself and not just being identified as a Muslim. And so you see that played out in drama series. I think one show that I can think of right now is the show Ramy, which is extremely popular in Muslim and non-Muslim spaces. I mean, this show was released, I believe there was season 2 or season 3. I'm not sure how many seasons were out there, but this show was widely discussed in public spaces outside of the Muslim community, and a lot of people who were practicing Muslims from within our Muslim communities felt that didn't represent them. However, that story did represent a segment of our community. So when we talk about representation, especially in the last 20 years and in the future, there's many different voices to share within our own communities, and that can be challenging if we feel like our voices aren't heard, our particular Muslim voice isn't heard. Then it's really up to us to tell that particular side of the story, that particular angle of the story.
So that takes us to the second part, and maybe Professor Masri can comment on. So what's the impact of that growing contribution of different or diverse Muslims from different backgrounds, different levels of religiosity into the wider media, not just the news media? What do you think is the impact?
Good question. I'm kind of boring as an academic. I am very much empirical. I want to see evidence. So the reality is that, I mean, I can give you what I think might happen over time, but we don't have a lot of research yet showing the kind of impact that you're speaking to. But I think that we could, we can surmise that over time, Muslims sort of taking control or more control of media narratives and telling their own story or stories, diverse stories, will have a kind of a pluralistic effect, right? It will create a type of plurality and complexity around these media narratives, and that's very important. I think that we would be remiss if we didn't point out that, especially in Muslim immigrant communities in the West, Muslims are very underrepresented in mass media. Muslims tend to be overrepresented in things like engineering and medicine. There are not a ton of Muslim journalists. There are not a ton of Muslim recording artists, right? I mean, people like Raif and you know, the others that are out there with Awakening, you know, Maher Zain and others, Native Deen, and some of the others are doing wonderful, really critically important work. But, you know, we need to do more to support that work. I think it needs to be mainstreamed, and we need more. You know, we need more artists, quite frankly. But I do think that over time there could be an effect, but I can't speak to any specifics because we don't have them yet.
Thank you, Dr. Misri. I want to actually, because I think part of this is to engage our community to think, but also act. And so, you know, this one piece that you're saying that we need more people to, you know, get into that space of production and that space of creative creation. But it also sounds to me like you're saying that research, we don't have research as well. So if people are looking to kind of even study and look into those spaces to understand better, I think we're still in that space, perhaps from what you're saying, that of studying Islamophobia and that representation in media, specifically news. But what else can we start looking at to get a bigger picture and start understanding or creating knowledge around production and representation and this conversation around Islam, the narrative of Islam and Muslims, you know, and I want to say more than North America, perhaps the Western context or contemporary times.
You know, what I maybe I wasn't clear. What I meant, I mean, there's a ton of research on Islamophobia or you know, representations of Islam and Muslims going back many decades, actually, and not just in the news media but also in the entertainment media. You have, you know, people like Jack Shaheen who wrote a book looking at 100 years of Muslim representation in film, right, in Hollywood film. What I mean to say is that what I meant to say is that the impact of, you know, Awakening Records on mainstream representation has not been studied, and that's something that, because it's a very new phenomenon. You know, I mean, we're kind of like in this little vacuum in 2023, but this is all very new. It's not like we have, you know, 50 years or 40 years or 30 years of you know, mainstream Muslim entertainment to draw on. So I think that it is an area that needs to be researched. We have research on the portrayals, we have the content side, but the impact side or the effects side, that's something that we haven't, you know, we haven't studied enough.
Thank you, Dr. Masri. And I want to go back to Raif on this comment on the different types of Muslims. And it seems to me, or it seems to some people, that the accepted stories are the stories of integration and assimilation, the stories of Muslims who want to live normally and naturally in this culture and this context, and less accepted in the mainstream media. More original, if I call Islamic narratives, similar to the work that you do, Raif, and Awakening in general. How do you quantify this? Like, do you feel that your work has ears and has presence in the wider community, or is it solely focused or accepted within the Muslim community?
Well, I believe that, like, most of the music that I create and my label creates is for the Muslim community. So that's by design. There are some songs for sure that is accepted, you know, outside of our community. And yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge that not just within the music space, but life in general, living in the West, the balance between, do we want to be accepted, or do we want to keep, for who we are, or do we have to sort of water down our faith, or how we want to be represented? And when Professor Masri was speaking about, we just don't have enough information about the impact of the kind of music that we're creating in the wider communities. But what we can do is look back and look at what Muslim communities have done for hundreds of years. And I've seen this firsthand in countries like Malaysia and Indonesia, where Islam is not native to those islands, and music and art was used quite a bit to teach then the majority non-Muslims about Islam, and it was very effective for hundreds of years. Art and music and the performing arts were used to not only teach Islam, but make people fall in love with Prophet Muhammad والسلام, and fall in love with Allah Azza wa Jal. And if you go to Mecca or Medina, you'll see that love come out from people who are from Malaysia and Indonesia. And so we have these references that we can sort of look back at, and these lessons that we see that for hundreds of years. And so when I look at the history of Islam in Indonesia, Malaysia, and in particular when it comes to music and the arts, I'm so hopeful that this can happen in other parts of the world. It has happened in other parts of the world. It just takes time, I guess.
If I just do a quick follow-up to this one, Raif, and ask, so we know that our black communities, in their production of music over many generations, it had its special identity. And different communities and indigenous communities' contribution to art and music were also had a special identities. I understand when you say that your work was focused on producing for the Muslim community, but if you are to produce for the wider community Muslim music, what would this be like? Or Muslim art and creative productions? What is Muslim music and Muslim contributions space?
Well, when we talk about Muslim music, for me, a lot of it is like folk music. So folk music is music that was passed down from generation to generation, and it wasn't made with the intention of sort of entertaining any crowds, even though it was and it was entertaining. But when we talk about folk music, when we talk about Muslim music, we're creating music that's meaningful to us, with the hopes that others would see the beauty in it. And the reason I say that is if we create music just for the outside community, and as people have done, it comes off as inauthentic, and people can sense that. And so and again, we could use the example of African American Muslims and their culture, and they've cultivated their culture for themselves, and because of that, the natural beauty of that culture, of that music, showed, and people then accepted it because it was genuinely beautiful. Similarly, when you look at Christian rock or Christian music, people are singing, are writing songs about their faith and how beautiful it is to them. And now you'll see even a lot of mainstream pop songs are taking references from Christian rock or Christian pop. And so I don't see why this can't happen with our community and our message. But it does take time, I believe. And it takes, like Dr. Masri said, an interest and an investment in the arts within our communities, so that our art and our stories and our productions are valued.
Thank you.
How much time do we have? I'd like to add on to that, if I could.
Please go ahead. We have a surprise question for you around this as well, but we'll leave it till the end.
Okay. Well, I think I might know where you're going with that. And actually, I was gonna say something about that in this context. So I think we have to recognize the challenge that Muslim artists face. So if someone like Raif, who does wonderful music, but there are 330 million Americans, but the kind of music, if we're just being real, if we're being realistic, the kind of music that Raif does is sort of narrowcast. There are very few non-Muslim Americans or Canadians or Western English-speaking Europeans that are going to pay attention to those songs. And that's not just true of Muslim artists, but also even it's very difficult for Christian artists to break into the mainstream. In fact, the easiest way to break into the mainstream is to just lose part of that identity and just do what everybody else does, right? And we have to be honest and realistic, with ourselves, that we live in a society that is characterized to some extent, I don't want to overgeneralize, but to some extent by a sort of moral and ethical decline over the past, however long. I don't want to put a number on it, but if you sexualize women, your songs are going to be more likely to sell. We know this empirically, by the way. If you talk about if your songs are materialistic, right, then your songs are going to be more likely to resonate with mainstream society. It's the same with movies. The more violence you have in the movies, the more likely they are to be successful. So I'm going to tell the little story. I think I'm going to steal your thunder here on the surprise. So I dabble in music myself on the side. It's just kind of a side hobby. But so I do songs that don't get, a lot of, I don't really market them, and I'm not signed to a label, so they don't get a lot of attention or streams. I just kind of do it because it's a fun hobby. But so on the last song that I did, I decided to put E for explicit. There's an option when you release a song that you can indicate that the song is explicit or that it has explicit lyrics. Now the song does not have any explicit lyrics. I don't curse. You could play the song for a 5-year-old child, but this song, because that's the only. I don't think it's any better than other songs that I've done. But because it had the E, it was picked up by a whole bunch of playlists on Spotify and ended up getting a lot more streams than my other songs. So that's just one small example. And I say all of that to say or suggest to Muslims who are listening to us right now or watching that we really, I think, need to do a lot more when we have these talented artists in our communities, right? And I don't want to name the names. We have one with us right now, Raif, but we need to actually support these people instead of, buying the latest, mainstream artist album. How about supporting our Muslim musicians or our Muslim filmmakers or the people that are doing other forms of content production, doing shows? If we're not going to support that stuff, then it's going to die. It's going to die off. These people should be well known in our communities. They should be famous in our communities, and they should be making money. Not that they're doing it for money, right? They're sincere, but they should be able to earn a living doing this, and very, very few people are able to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Masri, for your contributions and for these interesting perspectives from different angles. I want to ask a final question to Brother Raif about the creative production of mini Muslims for children, and either this mini Muslims or your entire work. I see a clear projection of second generation Muslims. I hear their voice, I see their contribution, and I feel that the addition that they give with these productions and what makes it really Muslim is the fact that it has a message, a meaningful message. It has some a positive impact that is sought. And how do you bring this all together with many Muslims?
Sure. So with many Muslims, our goal is really to allow children or give children the opportunity to fall in love with Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and Allah Azza wa Jal. And this, if you think about the nursery rhymes that your parents sang to you when you were a child, those things stick for life. And so we're still figuring out with many Muslims on exactly how to do this. But when you think about a child's relationship with Islam, it's not, you don't want it to be do this, don't do that, because if it's too harsh or if it's too dry, it's hard to fall in love with that. So one quick example of that is one of our most popular songs is "Yay, We Get to Pray," and a lot of times when we tell children about Salah, we tell them we're Muslim, we have to pray, right? We're Muslim, we have to fast. And this, even though we may not intend it, when we tell our children we have to pray, it almost becomes like a task that they have to do. Instead, the messaging that we have, and this is by intention and by design, is that we tell our children we get to pray, that it's a chance for us. It's not a have to task thing. It's we have the blessing and the opportunity to pray. So yes, the song does talk about the 5 different prayers that they go through, but the chorus is "Yay, we get to pray," as if it's as it should be an exciting opportunity to connect with Allah Azza wa Jal. So we're still figuring it out with many Muslims, and the good news is that there's lots of folks doing work in this Muslim children's space, and we're trying our best to raise the bar in terms of quality production and quality of content. So we're very excited about the years to come with many Muslims, inshallah.
Thank you, Brother Raif, and we look forward to taking this content and for generations that come ahead of us to inshallah benefit from it. And we thank both of our guests, Brother Raif and Dr. Masri, for being with us here today and having this important conversation and kind of looking at this topic around production, media content, both from whether that's news, whether that's creative production, and where we as a Muslim community kind of fit into this and how we can potentially even impact. Jazakallah khair. Inshallah, we look forward to having more of these conversations and looking forward to more of your work, Dr. Masri's research as well.
Thank you so much.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Thank you.
Assalamu
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
All right, so welcome back in studio. So to continue that conversation, actually, we have Brother Taha Ghayur, who will probably not be a stranger for many of you. He's a notable community leader based in Toronto. He is a trained human rights activist, writer, and personal growth and leadership trainer as well. He's been involved in impactful community initiatives for more than 20 years across North America, mashallah. He is the vice president of Sound Vision Foundation, which is a Muslim media and professional development training institution. He is a board member at Muslim Fest, which is an award-winning Muslim festival celebrating Muslim arts and culture. And so we welcome you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, of course. It's a pleasure for us. I want to perhaps pick up where that conversation with Dr. Masri and Brother Raif kind of ended in terms of content and looking at how to build meaningful content that is still authentic to the narrative of Islam. We have the example that Dr. Masri provided when you have certain type of content, whether that's content that is more materialistic or sexualized or explicit, it gets more attention. And we know that those are not the types of things that we want to necessarily promote in Islamic productions. And given your experiences, I wanted to ask you, how do you kind of develop authentic content knowing that that's kind of what you're contending with out there?
Well, that's a great question, and I think this is a question every person who in media is asking, whether Muslim or non-Muslim. How do we get the attention of the attention and eyeballs of young Muslims or people that we are actually trying to reach? And I think the bottom line here is that we want to ensure that we use all techniques of storytelling. And those techniques of storytelling are universal. Things that we know even from the Quran itself, how to captivate people's attention. And that art of storytelling is something that Muslims have, alhamdulillah, begun to master. This is something that we tried to do almost 30 years ago before I even joined where I am today at Sound Vision. And one of the things was, the idea was, how do we produce content that is captivating to young Muslims at the time. And there's really nothing out there, but what we knew is that there's Sesame Street is there, that young people were tuning into and really loved. And that's when we decided to launch something called Adam's World, which is use a similar concept. So I think what, as Muslims and Canadian Muslims, American Muslims, we should be focused on doing is using the art of storytelling, mastering it, and not compromising our standards of production. If we can do that, the reason why Disney is able to do what they're able to do is not only because they have sometimes hyper sexualized content, and that goes for Hollywood or other forms of media out there or productions out there, but it's also because they have raised the bar of production very high. And I think Muslims should have no limits other than, of course, resources, which is definitely one of our challenges. But I think we're getting there.
Thank you, Brother Taha. And I have a quick follow-up for this. And mashallah, I consider you a pioneer in this field, all the work that you've done in different capacities, but primarily around these creative Muslim productions in different ways. But my simple question is, so what makes a production a Muslim production? Is there such a thing as a halal production, or and what makes it really a truly Muslim production?
I think it's hard to define what is halal and what is Islamic when it comes to, or what is Muslim, let's put it this way, when it comes to production, because there's so many definitions out there. Just halal label has been actually used, overused, sometimes underused, underrated as well. But from my understanding is simply, if we stick to our principles of morality, moral foundations of of storytelling, once again, moral foundations of media, that from Islamic perspective do not cross those generous boundaries that Islam has set around morality, and as long as we are telling giving our narrative, producing our narrative from our perspective, and we're not compromising, or we're not necessarily copying and pasting what is already out there. As long as our content is authentic, our narrative is authentic, the players can be anybody. Could be Muslims, could be non-Muslims. We want to work collaboratively with everybody to ensure that we are engaging all sectors of society when it comes to production. But from my perspective, halal production or Islamic production really is all about ensuring that our content is true to our faith and true to our moral foundation. And it is something that is based on true, authentic narrative that we want to project. Otherwise, we are going to be just like any other mainstream media. Why bother and why waste time and energy in producing content with just simply Muslim characters?
Jazakallah khair. I want to ask a bit of a practical point to follow up to this. Both you and Brother Raif talk about this, art of storytelling, or the skill of storytelling, and then you're also connecting it to being authentic to our traditions. For our viewers and members of the community, if this is something that people want to go down this path in terms of productions and media and all of these things, how do you learn to storytell? How do you, what are some things, even if it's something as simple as your own YouTube channel, what are some things that, practically speaking?
Well, alhamdulillah, we are living in an age of not only just social media, but really self-publishing and self-publication. Yes. The beautiful part is that everybody has access to it. You can start telling your story today, right now, literally. Pick up your phone, pick up any device, start telling your story. Now, you will learn on the way. You're going to make mistakes, but you got to start now. And it could be as simple as you getting up in the middle of your living room and start telling stories, or maybe doing your own art, whatever art form you like in your family or within whatever networks you're part of. That being said, my suggestion to any people who are aspiring artists is to keep doing it consistently. Do it every day. Do a bit of it, whether it's writing, singing, video editing, graphic design, whatever it may be, or storytelling of any form. Do it every day. and learn something new every day from professionals. Learn something every day by taking courses. There's so many incredible opportunities for you out there. At the same time, I wouldn't necessarily suggest, unless you have perfected the art, that you go full-fledged into that field unless you know that you are going to be, of course, able to do this professionally. So I think everybody should do this. Start somewhere, start small, grow your, perfect your art, and at the same time, learn from people who are experts, learn from who are actually doing this for quite some time. Get some mentors who are going to help you on this path. And if you think time is right for you to actually go right into this field and study it professionally, make that a career, that's great. Otherwise, I would suggest that you should do this on the side and keep perfecting your art and just keep doing this as a hobby. There are many great people who are creative artists who are doing this on the side and professionally doing some other great things.
Jazakumullah khairan, Brother Taha. And I wish we had more time. We would. I have so many follow-up and many even philosophical questions. But actually, that's a good place where we can actually bring it back to the audience and ask them that critical question that Sister Maimuna started the conversation with today, or asked us to think about. And I think it's about this question of Muslim or Islamic creative productions. And we tend to think about this as what is not halal or what is haram, and we try to stay away from it. But the question to our audience, and we encourage them to write to us and send comments and send feedback and send suggestions and ideas that we're actually willing to support here with whatever capacity that we have. And I'm sure Brother Taha can mentor many people into this as well, of what can you produce and you call a Muslim production. It's not what is not an Islamicized production or a production that looks like this but is not haram. What is actually a truly Muslim production from the core objectives of what you do to the end result and end product? If people can think and contribute and send us this, I think it will be a really meaningful conversation that we can continue and talk on. And I do not really want to wish to close this segment before asking Brother Taha about Sound Vision as always a place of creativity in our community. What are you working on now, and what do you plan to have in the future?
Well, very briefly, Sound Vision started off about 30 years ago with Adam's World, as I mentioned earlier, which was basically an idea of creative Muslim production for children. And since then, it has, alhamdulillah, evolved from VHS to DVD episodes to now Adam's World app. And you can check it out at adamsworldapp.com. We have done in the past Radio Islam for 20 years, being the only daily radio show in America. But today, for the past 2 years, we have something called Muslim Network TV. And that is basically a Muslim production that is a Muslim channel, based out of Chicago and Toronto, where we basically have an authentic American or Canadian Muslim narrative, telling our own stories, and more importantly, sharing our news and analysis, which is sadly missing. We talk about all sorts of negative headlines, but this is a place where we actually hear about daily episodes, daily news from Muslim perspective.
Jazakumullah khairan.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Taha, and I can testify to have even, starting to watch Adam's World as I was growing up and sharing with my own child now, and I can testify to the impact that it has had on generations. We want to invite any of you, as Brother Khalid was sharing with us, if you have questions, let us know. You can see the links that are popping up below. And with that, what we will say is, Brother Khalid, next week, what can we look forward to?
Okay, so we'll move into another very important conversation. I think it's a conversation in the news these days about our community and how many of our institutions and centers and organizations are facing structural Islamophobia. And we've seen a full Senate investigation led by Senator Salma Tolajan and also a recent publication by Dr. Jasmine Zain about the Islamophobia industry in Canada. We intend to have a deep conversation exposing this kind of Islamophobia in our system in the country that we love most, and what can we do about it. So hopefully next week we do this. If you have questions ahead that you would like to ask in our next show, please feel free to email us at productions@macnet.ca, or leave a comment on the YouTube channel. So with this, we look forward to engage with all of you, and by next week. Thank you so much.
Jazakallah khair. So we will be back here every Thursday night, 7:30, airing live with our guests. And before we leave, we want to leave you with, as we close tonight, inshallah, with some videos of our artists and guests that are out there that you can access, just to leave you with a taste of what these people are producing and the meaningful work that they are doing. And with that, we'll ask Brother Khalid to close for us, inshallah.
Okay, and inshallah, you'll be able to watch and listen to the audio broadcast on most of the podcast channels, on the Mac channel or Islam and Life show, and we'll share this information on the YouTube channel as well. So with this, I end with a closing dua. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
For a minute and smile. Why is everybody so serious? Acting so darn mysterious. Got your shades on your eyes and your heels. They say that love never lasts, that love never lives to see another day. But what I know deep down inside,
I did the math, calculating, trying to find my other half. I'm on every other site, dude, I'm on every other app. See, you can add it up, I double down, smash the gas, stand the gas slow.
Islam in Life is an online production by the Muslim Association of Canada.